HIV, first of all, nobody's ever found it in a human being. Think of it. The so-called HIV tests do not detect HIV in a person. They detect your antibodies that react to some proteins that are produced at Abbott Laboratory. They do not find HIV in the person. They find a person's functioning immune system that could react against HIV if it were there.
Millions of people take tests that are referred to as HIV tests. However, the idea that there is a laboratory test that can determine whether or not a person is infected with the virus is simply an illusion. The FDA has never approved a test kit that claims to be used for the purpose of diagnosing HIV infection.
I don't recommend people ever getting tested. The reason is, I don't know what the tests mean, and I think no one else knows what the tests mean. I've never seen any evidence that what these tests purport to show, they're actually showing, namely the presence of a virus, the presence of an exogenous virus. I really would like to see the electron microscopic data of this, and apparently there is none. There is none where you've done a rigorous isolation protocol.
All kinds of diseases started coming into the AIDS family faster than anyone should have been comfortable with, really. To go from 2 or 3 to go to 30 in a few years was like somebody should have said, hey, there's something wrong here and it's got to be financial. Things don't happen that fast in science. You don't suddenly notice that one new organism is causing every problem. I mean, it was a bizarre thing that happened. It really was. It didn't really have any precedence in terms of medicine before that, unless perhaps you could think of the possession by the devil stuff, right? You see, once you're possessed by the devil, anything that happens to you or anything you do is got to do with that, right? So it makes it easier for you to get tuberculosis, and it makes it easier for you to get uterine cancer. It makes it easier for you to get Candida albicans. And so all those things can now be called AIDS. Now, why would anybody do that? And why would any reasonable doctor start lumping together various symptoms into one pile and think all this is caused by HIV?
Dr. Kary Mullis, who invented the polymerase chain reaction, gives this in '83, I believe, and he got the Nobel Prize in 1993, gives this little story that he was hired to do PCR for an HIV project for a private company, and he wrote as the first sentence of his paper, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And he said he turned to a virologist and said, what's the reference for that? And the virologist said, you don't need it. Well, Mullis is smart enough to know, of course, something new as this, you'd always have a series of original papers that established unequivocally that this was the cause of AIDS.
Then, and only then, I started looking into it. I looked up a bunch of papers in Science that Bob Gallo, I knew about him and had written. I figured, well, Gallo must have been the one to figure it out, because he's the name I've heard associated with it. I looked at his papers, and I didn't find anything in there that actually showed me that there was a fact now in science called HIV is the cause of AIDS, or even the probable cause of AIDS, which is all I would have expected, the probable cause of AIDS. Highly probable, because they were attacking the whole problem by then as though it were certainly the cause. So I'd expect it to be highly probable, but I couldn't find anything that said it was remotely probable even. It was possible, but it wasn't probable. And so therefore, it wasn't even close to what you'd call a fact.
Well, I call these the AIDS axioms. AIDS is contagious, AIDS is sexually transmitted, AIDS is caused by HIV, and that the anti-HIV drugs promote health and well-being. The reason I call these axioms is because they're assumed to be true. These 4 statements are assumed to be true. You cannot find the evidence in the scientific literature that shows that these AIDS axioms are indeed true.
There are no really good experiments that would lead anybody who was at least maintaining a healthy skepticism to believe that HIV was responsible for this series of, not series, but kind of a loose confederation of diseases that people are now willing to call AIDS, right? It's a confederation of maybe 30 different diseases, all of which have existed in one form or other prior to the condition that we call AIDS ever being pointed out, and all of which have had some other explanation at one time or other. You know, to say that all 30 of those are somehow caused, in at least some cases, called AIDS cases, by a virus called HIV, I think I haven't seen any evidence for that. I haven't even seen anybody trying to bring evidence forth for that.
And he said he's been looking for that since, I guess, the late 80s, and he hasn't ever been able to find anyone that can give him a paper that showed, number one, isolation of HIV, rigorous formal isolation of HIV, and secondly, using Koch's postulates, demonstrating that HIV is a causal microorganism. Where is the original paper that isolated HIV so that nothing else was present, and they actually could go and find what the proteins were and the nucleic acids were? I think you won't find that paper because it hasn't been published yet.
I mean, I understand there are a lot of people, if you ask them about HIV causing AIDS as being a fact, they'll say, of course, it's indisputable. And the very fact that they will say it's indisputable might lead you to question their ability to understand scientific method. People that think any scientific fact is indisputable don't understand about scientific facts.
One of the distinguishing features of modern science is skepticism, the spirit to challenge other people's work, the spirit to challenge your own work. And I fear that this spirit is disappearing, in particular in the case of HIV and AIDS. Anybody that speaks up against or challenges some of the entrenched paradigms or principles is not only not welcome, but they are strongly criticized to the point of being called names: bigots, homophobes, baby killers, flat earthers, Holocaust deniers. Certainly this would indicate to me that the spirit of skepticism, the spirit of challenge, the spirit of scientific debate in this field is virtually completely gone.
I don't think most people got involved in it really looked at it and said, I don't think this is really true, but I won't get into it anyhow. It wasn't like that. It was like they were never questioning it because it was the easy way to go. You follow, I mean, if somebody's paying you $150,000 a year for working on something, you don't have to be questioning whether that's useful every day because it's useful to you. I mean, if you're trying to work your way up in IBM, you don't immediately go to the chairman of the company and say, does this company actually do what it says it does? I mean, are we really for real? I mean, you don't do that, right? So the fact that everybody that works for IBM believes in IBM as a company does not say that IBM really does what it says it does. It just says, well, of course, everybody that works for IBM kind of toes the line, right? So everybody in the field of AIDS works for AIDS in a way. I mean, you can think of it as a big corporation that's completely funded by the federal government. It's a big company. It's a big organization which has a pecking order. Not quite as distinct as some companies, but not as indistinct as you might think. It is not a bunch, it's not 30,000 independent scientists working in their own labs with their own ideas. See, so to say that they all go for it, it just says, well, they all belong to the club, don't they? They're all being paid out of the same coffer, and they're not going to be paid if they don't go for it. So you can't, the only way to resolve this for yourself is to say, I guess I'm going to have to learn a little about it.
The evidence that I have seen shows me nothing of the sort to resemble anything approaching a scientific basis of evidence that what's called AIDS is caused by a viral entity or by a retrovirus, whatever the initials are, HIV, IHV, VIH, you can scramble them any way you like. The cause and cure for AIDS is as near at hand as an alternative hypothesis.